Great. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dragana, and I'm the marketing manager here at Pressboard. If you're not familiar with Pressboard, we create technology solutions that empower brands and publishers to make better performing, more profitable content at scale. And that, of course, is the topic of our webinar today. Joining me today, we have Kevin Curtis, our Vice President of Revenue, who joined Pressboard in September from Rogers Media, and Leah Bjornson, who manages our content studio and has worked closely with our data scientists to produce many of the resources you'll see referenced today in our webinar. Any tool or resource that we do reference is available to you at the reference link at the bottom of each slide. We will send the slide deck out to each of you by email later today. And on the agenda for today, we are scheduled to go for 30 minutes, followed by 10 to 15 for Q&A. So please do submit any questions you may have, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Dragana, and thank you everyone for joining us. As mentioned, I joined Pressboard from Rogers Media. I have other extensive publisher experience, whether that be at Yahoo, MTV, and then many years at Rogers Media. So I'm familiar with the challenges around both selling branded content, whether that be how we price it or package it, as well as delivering performance to advertisers, other than just ad impressions around these packages. Now, last month, we conducted a survey of 20 major North American media groups, and we found that despite 2019 being called the year of subscription, publishers actually expect revenue from branded content to grow more than any other revenue stream. Now, there are challenges that go along with this. One of them is closing the sale. And for those who are winning the RFPs, executing profitably can often be a challenge. Given the current pricing packages and how complicated most publishers make them. At Pressboard, we've had the opportunity to work closely with a broad range of agencies, and those agencies and advertisers have shared their insights on challenges they've experienced with their content campaigns. The key takeaways are that the process of buying content is often too time-consuming. Advertisers also prefer to buy content without a lot of add-ons. I'm looking at you, brand sell banners and video impressions. And they value people reading the content the most, rather than just delivering impressions around the package. Similar to the rest of the digital advertising world, advertisers are demanding more from their content. They're looking for ways to quantify the success of the content, and they're looking for guaranteed performance. Lastly, they're also looking for brand safety, which is a huge part of what's happening in the industry right now. So what's the win-win solution for both publishers and advertisers? Something that's worked is the cost per read model. And the reason why it works is because the deliverables are clearly defined and the outcome is guaranteed. It's easier for advertisers to commit to a content campaign. Incremental reads can also be sold on existing campaigns. So for publishers, that can oftentimes be a new revenue stream, monetizing existing content. And publishers have the flexibility to deliver the reads organically or via paid media. It's their choice, and oftentimes it really just depends on how engaged their audience is. Now, practically speaking, what does cost per read look like? So in this example here, we've got a campaign budget of $20,000. On the cost per read model, we're looking at charging, basically having a package that requires the publisher to deliver 10,000 reads at $2 cost per read, and that equals $20,000. And the estimated profitability on that package, because of how simplified it actually is oftentimes 50% or higher. Now the flat fee, which is the pricing model that I'm sure most publishers are still using today and most advertisers and agencies are buying, You can see that they oftentimes package and bundle a number of different pieces together, but they don't actually guarantee any performance. And oftentimes, because they bundled so many things into the package, it's a very high touch implementation process. And so the profitability is oftentimes lower, usually around 20%. Okay, so now that you've committed to giving cost per read a try, there are a few things that you should do to ensure your campaign will be a success. One of them is to make sure that your brand advertiser is properly aligned to your audience, because you want that audience to be engaged with that piece of content such that you'll be able to deliver the reads at a lower cost per read for you. Campaign timeline, you have to make sure that it's long enough to deliver the actual reads that you've guaranteed. Creating a shorter window and a tighter geo to deliver the reads is often going to put you in a bit of a bind, so make sure that you give yourself some leeway. Team resources is a big one. Make sure that you've got the necessary resources to deliver the content and the reads, whether that's through media buying or through organic reach. And with that, I am going to transition over to Leah.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Just to give you guys a little bit of background about me, so I run our content studio here at Pressboard. We've worked with publishers and advertisers over the last few years to create over 2,000 stories that have all been sold and delivered on a cost per engagement, cost per read model. And it's really important, and why we're talking about this today is that it's important to have your content team engaged with your sponsored content campaigns from the get-go to make sure that you're able to actually deliver what your sales team is promising. So the reason why we wanted to include this section in the cost per read webinar today was that if your team has limited resources, for example, no media buyer or limited staff and time, you can save yourself a lot of time by being amplification minded when crafting your headline and story description. And since many ad platforms will scrape the article URL and auto-generate an ad, if those components are ad ready, you won't need to think about them down the line. So we're going to talk about three sort of sections today when it comes to creating content for amplification. And the first is headlines. We're going to move on in a few minutes to talking about ad copy and imagery, but we're going to start today with headlines because no matter how good your story is, if your headline doesn't describe in just a few words what your story is about, then someone isn't going to click on it as they scroll through their newsfeed. So when it comes down to it, not all headlines, no matter how editorial or eye-catching, are actually suited for amplification. BuzzFeed has gotten a lot of flack in the past for their clickbait headlines, but crafting copy that compels a reader to stop scrolling and click on their stories is what's made them incredibly successful. That said, you don't need to go quite as far as 5 reasons to buy a toothbrush, you'll never believe number 4, but there are tweaks you can make to preserve your tone while still creating compelling social copy. So this research was taken from BuzzSumo. BuzzSumo is a really excellent social engagement, data-driven company that measures sort of how engaged readers are with different kinds of content. And when optimizing your headlines, they have a few suggestions that are sort of just an easy checklist you can keep beside your computer when you're coming up with ideas or what have you. And 4 of the strongest motivators that they identify in headlines are, first, curiosity. So a headline that drives people to think, what is this story about? This seems like something that I should care about. I'm not sure what I'm going to be reading, but it's something that is clearly important to me. Second, explanatory headlines. So a headline that promises it's going to give you an answer to a question that you might have already had. So a lot of these kind of headlines start with, "This is why." You've probably seen those on the internet over the last few years for sure. Emotional headlines. So headlines that promise to give a feeling to a reader. And then tribal headlines, which I think are very useful for publishers today because they signal some kind of exclusivity and really specific targeted value to readers. So for example, an article like 10 things only New Yorkers will understand about dining out is something that if you're a New York audience, you'd think this is written specifically for me, it's going to give me specific advice, and it's something that is not just a catch-all article. So These are all great tips when you're optimizing your headlines. And a few more optimizing headline tricks. So, of course, we here at Pressboard never get it right the first time, sometimes get it right the first time, but we definitely don't expect to. So when we're creating creatives for article promotion, we actually often come up with between 4 and 10 different creatives. And that's where we get into A/B testing. So we'll often change up our headline when it comes to verb tense, how the headline is actually phrased, whether it's a question, a statement, or something more exclamatory. And then we also change whether we address the reader directly or indirectly, and all in an effort to make sure that our cost per read on those stories is as low as possible. So moving on from headlines, the second sort of important component to address when you're optimizing your social ads is your social copy. So we conducted a study just over a year ago where we analyzed 11,000 Facebook ads to see what copy performed the best and was the most affordable for publishers to drive traffic to. And there are a few key points that we'll go over today that we discovered. So first of all, excitement is addictive. Facebook ad copy that ends in an exclamation point is less expensive to promote than ad copy that ends in a period or question mark. And also positive statements are much more affordable to promote than statements that are potentially negative or veer on fear-mongering. So to give you a few examples of this in practice, we have some ad copy that we've used in previous campaigns where we've put these tactics sort of to the test. So first of all, we have this campaign that we did a little while back for a grocery campaign about new healthy school lunch programs. So if you'll see on the right, we have this ad that says 1 in 5 BC students is at risk of going to school hungry. In terms of sentiment, this might be a little more negative than positive. It's a little more sort of starting to veer on fear-mongering. And when you compare that to this new ad that we created that says, "This is a truly wonderful program," exclamation mark, positive, you can see that difference is reflected in the cost per read. So the ad on the left has a significantly more expensive cost per read at 86 cents, whereas the one that's more positive has a CPR of 17 cents. In a second example, we have this campaign that we did for a tourism organization where we were promoting ultimate ski vacations. This ad, you can see, ends in a declarative statement. Even in the spring, this town doesn't cool off, and the cost per read was 45 cents. When we adjusted that copy, it's a little hidden here, but it says every New Yorker should go here at least once with an exclamation mark, and you can see that the cost per read is almost halved at 24 cents a cost per read. And you can see as well that the engagement on the post was significantly more positive. So good evidence that these tactics can actually improve your bottom line. So finally, we're going to talk just briefly about imagery because, of course, that's kind of the trifecta: good imagery, good ad copy, good headlines. So there are a few insights, again, from that data study that we recommend that you leverage when creating your own copy, or own social ad. So first of all, when choosing images of people will actually cost you the most to promote, especially crowds or images of lots of people. Whereas images of objects that we connect with emotion or sensory experiences like food or home decor or pets are the cheapest to promote. And then when it comes to color too, we've actually found that the color blue, which is often oversaturated on the internet, is actually more expensive to promote than imagery that has more unusual colors like purple or green. And again, as Dragana mentioned, all of these resources will be available at the end of the webinar. We'll make sure to send you the link so that you can dig even more into the data. So just to summarize, a few key points to keep in mind when you're creating content for amplification so that you can keep your amplification costs down. Optimize your headlines with emotional copy that creates curiosity with readers. Keep your ad copy positive and use exclamation marks if appropriate. And finally, use images that we connect with emotions or sensory experiences. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dragana, who's going to give us more information on how to make this all come together.
Thanks, Leah. So one of the big challenges that we see with content is that it can be difficult to walk the line between getting readership at scale and maintaining quality engagement. So we've looked at different traffic sources and platforms, and we've found a solution that works for us. So we're going to share that with you, as well as some tips on how hopefully you can make it work for you too. So as part of our publisher survey that Kevin touched on earlier, we did ask publishers how they typically promote their content, and their number one response was Facebook, which is perfectly in line with what we have found as well. So we were really happy to see that. We have just seen the best reader engagement, the best click-throughs to reads on Facebook, and the quality and the cost that you get with Facebook is really, it's incomparable. We haven't found anything else that can quite compete at this point. So in terms of planning for success when you're using Facebook, one of the biggest questions that we are often asked by publishers is, how do you know how many reads you can sell on a campaign or a story? And the answer to that is we rely on the Facebook Audience Insights tool. If you're not using it, we really recommend you check it out. The link is just at the bottom of the slide there. So what this tool allows you to do is to input your geo, your demographic, and your interest-based targeting criteria, and it will let you know how many people you can reach on Facebook. So as an example, we did a skincare campaign in California targeting women ages 21 to 35 with an interest in skincare. And when we put all of that criteria in, Facebook has reported that we can access 450 to 500,000 average monthly users. So we take that number, we took 450,000, and then we apply our historical sort of average Facebook click-through rate for that vertical to that number, and that kind of results in how many reads we can deliver. So if you don't have historical Facebook click-through rate data, we typically use 1% as a very conservative idea of what you can reach. So for this campaign, we would say the upper limit would be approximately 45,000 people. And of course, if you are writing content about something that maybe is a little bit more niche, so in this example, perhaps the product that you're writing about is very expensive and maybe wouldn't appeal so broadly to this audience, you would just need to sort of adjust those numbers down a little bit. And the other thing to note as well is the average audience size is monthly. So if you're running a campaign for a shorter time frame, then you want to adjust for that as well. Another question that we're often asked is about the cost differences between the different verticals that we've run content in. So what you can see here, and this full report is available for you as well. Typically, if we're doing campaigns that are in government, for telecom companies, or in the B2B space, those audiences are higher value and cost more to deliver reads to. So we suggest that you would adjust your cost per read slightly depending on the audience. But again, if you use the Audience Insights tool, you can kind of determine the size of the audience you're dealing with. And then at the lower end of the spectrum, our campaigns for entertainment or hospitality tend to be some of the most cost efficient that we've run. And just a few execution tips if you are using Facebook. So one of the biggest things that we recommend for success is that you utilize the Facebook Pixel. You really want to give Facebook as much data as possible so that the algorithm can do the optimization work for you. And the Facebook Pixel is critical to that. Additionally, we suggest you choose the traffic campaign objective if you are trying to drive traffic to your website story. Some people have gone with awareness in the past, but we have found, and this is kind of backed up by our conversations with our Facebook rep, that if you give Facebook the correct objective, then it can do a better job of optimizing for that goal. Additionally, we recommend using landing page views as your optimization for ad delivery goal. And of course, in order to use that, you really do need to have the Facebook Pixel on the page. Just a few more tips. We recommend being cautious with automatic placements. This is the default selection by Facebook when you're creating a campaign. But if you take a closer look at the placements, you might sort of realize that maybe you don't want to reach your audience at all of these times. If you are trying to drive somebody to read content, maybe Messenger isn't the best place to reach them. And from our experience, Facebook newsfeed is the best results that we've seen. So we typically start our campaigns only on the newsfeed. Additionally, I know some people like to add audience network to their campaigns, but we recommend you don't utilize it for two reasons. First of all, we have found that the clicks that convert into a read from audience network, that ratio is quite a bit lower than from newsfeed only. And additionally, Facebook only gives you reporting on what sites you've put that ad on after the fact. So you do want to be really careful with brand safety and use a block list if you are going to use the audience network. We also recommend using UTMs to differentiate your traffic sources if you're using Facebook and native and some organic ads, just so that when you're generating those reads, you can tell where you're having the best results and then make the decision to maybe divert some of your budget there. We also suggest focusing on your KPIs, which in this case for an article would be reads on the content. Some people tend to discuss cost per click or impressions more, but ultimately, like, you want to focus on the people who are actually getting to your article, and sometimes focusing on cost per click might be a bit of a false metric. We also typically suggest running your campaigns over at least a 2 to 3 week period, just to give yourself enough time to optimize ads if necessary and to really bring that cost down. And as well, if you are having problems with a campaign and maybe aren't liking the cost that you're seeing, don't be afraid to just scrap that ad group that you've created and start over again to give Facebook some fresh data to work with. And just a quick overview of our plans for success. We definitely suggest using the Audience Insights tool and UTMs to track your traffic source and quality. Be extra cautious with niche audiences, and B2B which will probably be more expensive to reach. So in those cases, you definitely want to charge more for those reads. Allow yourself enough time to make optimizations to your campaign, and don't focus on clicks and impressions, and instead focus on landing page views and how much it's costing to generate each of those. So our key takeaways for the campaign: collaborate early. It's not always easy at a larger organization, obviously, but if you can get input from from sales and from content and from the people who are delivering the campaign sort of right from the get-go, it's a lot easier to plan for success. Additionally, be sure to account for limitations such as audience size or niche subject matter, and give yourself enough time to deliver the reads. And check in on your campaigns regularly, and don't be afraid to delete ads, add new ads, test out creatives, and just make edits as needed to bring that cost down. Perfect, thank you. That concludes our webinar. We hope that you were able to gain some valuable insights from it. I just wanted to add as well that we do have 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. And so feel free to send us an email if we don't get to your questions at this point. We are happy to chat at any time about cost per read and how we found success. So please feel free to reach out. And if you're interested in learning more about Pressboard's tech solutions and how they have helped empower publisher content studios, reach out anytime. We're obviously very happy to discuss that as well.
Excellent. So we have a few questions here that we've collected. So thanks everyone who submitted. The first question we have is, what is considered a read? If a reader clicks on the article, whether from Facebook or a website, how can you tell if the reader actually did read the article? So maybe Kevin, do you want to talk about what defines a read?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So a read is considered a read when the analytics code on the landing page actually loads. So it's usually generally a few seconds, but depending on which analytics you're using to track the visits to that page, you should be able to filter by the amount of time spent on that page and how far someone scrolled on that page, so that you can give a more in-depth look, not just the number of reads, but the quality of reads. And so you can find out how much the average time spent was and the average scroll depth was. And some of that analytics is available in Google Analytics, and the more in-depth stuff like scroll depth is available through the Pressboard platform, Studio Stack.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Our next question here is, do you suggest putting sponsored content through Facebook Ad Manager instead of just boosting an already existing post to give you more options for targeting? Dragana, this seems like a question for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of A/B testing, so probably what I would do is I would do both. I would boost the original post and see what kind of cost we're getting with that one. And then I would also put it into Facebook Ads Manager, maybe test out some new targeting and just see if we can get some more reach and maybe at a lower cost. And then I would probably divert the budget to whichever of those two options is working better.
Perfect. Okay. Next question we have here. Good questions, everyone. So thank you again for submitting them. Wondering if the cost per read model, using $20,000 as an example, is based on pricing information you're getting from the publishers you've sampled. So that's referring to that slide we had earlier in the deck. Dragana, do you want to take this again?
Yeah. So the slide where Kevin compared the fixed price and the cost per read models, we actually took that sample from an IAB deck, but I can tell you just from the many campaigns that we've run at Pressboard, it is the pricing model that they're using with $20,000 as the budget and a couple of stories in the amplification. That is totally online with what we would see from the campaigns that we've run here. Additionally, if you are curious about how publishers are pricing their content, I can tell you sort of anecdotally, there's such a huge range, anywhere from $1,000 for a story up to 50,000 plus. But the best way to sort of see what publishers are charging in your vertical, and it's maybe at your size, would be to check out the Pressboard Marketplace, where we have hundreds of publishers who have inserted their own pricing packages, and that would be, I think, the best place to get an in-depth look at publisher pricing.
Great. And our last question is, with B2B campaigns, what is your best suggestion for imagery when the concepts can be quite abstract? For example, data, analytics, or IT. So I can take this one. Yeah, this is definitely a big challenge, and it's one that we face too when you're working with, especially B2B clients, is you end up seeing a lot of the same images online, the classic someone scrolling on their phone, sitting on their laptop, and these images tend to sort of fade into the background. What we try to do is think of abstract ways to represent concepts. So, for example, if you're talking to a business about growing their audience size, maybe you can use that word growing and think of it in different ways. Like maybe you have imagery of a farmer or a gardener sort of tending to their garden. I'm trying to think of one we did recently where the client was talking about amplifying your voice to reach more customers. So instead of sort of the generic kind of B2B imagery we would use, we actually found an image of a phonograph because it was sort of about amplification, reaching more people, volume. So trying to think of concepts in more abstract ways, I'd say would be sort of a first place to start. And again, we have that study that has some other tips for, what sort of colors to use and what kind of imagery performs best. So I would definitely recommend checking that out.
Perfect. Well, I think that concludes our time for Q&A. We just want to thank everybody again for joining us, and feel free to reach out with any questions or comments you may have. Enjoy the rest of your day.